So we have some absolutely massive breaking news that Bernie Sanders is surging in the Texas 2020 Democratic primary. A new poll released just a little bit ago shows that Bernie Sanders is at 26%. He's only 2 behind Joe Biden, and he has double the support of Elizabeth Warren. Nobody else is above 10%. But what matters here more than the total numbers is the change in numbers since September, the last time this poll was done. And here, Bernie Sanders is up 13 points. He's doubled his support in a few months, while Joe Biden is slipping by 4, effectively putting Biden and Bernie in a statistical tie in Texas. This has to be a big narrative hit to Joe Biden, because at the end of the day, one of the reasons people have been saying that the Bernie Sanders surge is more bluster than reality is that it was clustered in very liberal states, in some of the early states, and that when it came to the South, when it came to some of the Republican-leaning states where more conservative Democrats reside, Joe Biden would easily win, would take most, if not all, of the delegates. It didn't really matter that Bernie Sanders won some smaller states in the North, like Vermont, by big amounts, because Joe Biden would rack up all the delegates he needed in places like the South. But this poll puts that all in question. Certainly, Biden's winning, but whereas a few months ago, Bernie Sanders was at risk of being shut out entirely from delegates in Texas by being below the 15% threshold. Now he's effectively competing with Biden for the delegate lead in that particular state. This is a state that Biden has to be banking on when he wants to rack up a delegate gap over Bernie and the rest of the field. And at least with regards to Bernie, this is showing that Joe Biden's southern firewall may not be as strong as Biden assumed, and Bernie Sanders' supposed weakness outside of the liberal Northwest and Northeast, or maybe liberal states like California, has been exaggerated, and that Bernie actually does have at least some strength in non-traditional areas for him in the last primary. So here's the deal. This has to be seen as a fundamental piece of evidence proving that the Bernie Sanders surge is much broader and maybe more significant than what we thought even just a couple days ago. But this poll is also really important because it tears down another narrative, or at least tears into that narrative a bit. Joe Biden has been floating along on this idea that he's the electable guy, that Bernie's the passion guy, the guy that a lot of people love for his ideas and vision, but Joe Biden's the hard-nosed, defeat Donald Trump guy and, get things done practically and pragmatically. That Joe Biden in states like Texas, in the South, in states outside of the Democratic core, would be the one to defeat Donald Trump. But this poll shows that that's not necessarily the case. In this poll, they asked, Trump versus some of the top Democrats, who would you vote for? And in this particular poll, all the Democrats lose to Trump. But Warren and Buttigieg lose by rather large margins. And Joe Biden loses by 5, likely outside the margin of error, or almost outside the margin of error. But Bernie Sanders fares best of all, losing to Trump by only 3 points, demonstrating that in states like Texas, which the Democrats feel they have an opportunity to maybe take if the election goes really well, it might be Bernie Sanders and not Joe Biden that's the ticket to carrying that state. And Bernie Sanders doing very well against Trump likely has down ballot implications. If Bernie Sanders is doing better against Trump, that likely helps Democrats running for the Senate and running for Congress. And Bernie Sanders might well help elect more Democrats in Texas than Joe Biden, when the traditional wisdom was that Bernie Sanders would hurt Democrats in that state and Joe Biden would help save moderates in the House and maybe even help win a Senate seat. But that's not what this is showing. Bernie Sanders is the best poised to defeat Donald Trump in Texas and to get more people voting Democrat and less people voting Republican, both because he's bringing new people to the polls, but he's also probably flipping some working class Republicans who maybe voted for Trump and now want an actual person that represents actual working class interests. So this is a fantastic poll for Bernie Sanders. It is just one poll, but in terms of busting narratives around Joe Biden's supposed electability in moderate states and Joe Biden's Southern Democratic primary firewall, this is fantastic news. This shows, guys, that Bernie's rise isn't just in Iowa and New Hampshire. It's not just in those early states. The whole hope from Biden and the neoliberal establishment that even if Bernie had a strong caucus in Iowa and a strong primary in New Hampshire, that he would just fade away once the South came along, might not be true. He doesn't necessarily need to beat Biden in some of these states, but if he can rack up big wins in progressive areas of the country and give Joe Biden a good fight in states like Texas, Bernie Sanders could well win the nomination, tearing down narrative after narrative after narrative in the process. And when it all comes down to it, Bernie Sanders, the supposed far-left radical who wouldn't appeal to people in the middle of the country in places like Texas, may be the best poised to defeat Donald Trump.